what is a Form 3? So in the context of what I'm talking about, I mean a Form 3 under the Mental Health Act in Ontario. So to give you a roadmap, I'm going to cover the who, what, where, when, and why. And so we'll start with the who. So who fills out the Form 3? It must be filled out by a physician. That's what the Mental Health Act says. Practically speaking, this is usually a psychiatrist. The Form 3 is a form that's filled out by the psychiatrist with respect to a patient who is detained at a psychiatric facility as an involuntary patient. So what? So the Form 3 is an actual form. It's quite short and it has different boxes that get checked off. And the idea of it is to keep somebody at the hospital as a psychiatric patient, basically make them an involuntary patient, because there's a belief that if they were to go into the community, that there's a high chance they will harm themselves, whether on purpose or not, or they may cause harm to others. So the Form 3 gets filled out in the hospital, in a psychiatric facility. That is because the person who can be subject to the Form 3 is already there. So this is a form that's kind of a continuation of a sequence of events. And if you haven't watched my video on Form 1s, you should go back and watch that so that this one makes more sense. So the Form 3 gets filled out in the hospital where the person is, usually on the psychiatric unit of a hospital. So who, what, where, when. So the timing of it is when the first form, the Form 1, expires. So it's possible on a Form 1, somebody might be free to go. They might be basically discharged from the hospital and they don't need to continue to stay. But if the Form 1 comes to an end of the 72 hours, what happens next? If that person continues to meet the criteria under the Mental Health Act, and it's believed that they do need to stay at the hospital as an involuntary patient. So the Form 1 ends, the Form 3 gets signed, and it continues the stay. The duration of the Form 3 is for 14 days. So at the end of 14 days, Form 3 is no good, and a new form would be issued. And by issued, I mean signed by a physician. So I don't think I mentioned that the Form 3 has to be filled out by a different doctor from the Form 1. So this is some of the checks and balances in our system, because it is a huge deal to detain somebody at a psychiatric facility. That is a violation of someone's liberty. And the idea is that there's good reason to do so, but we still need to have checks and balances to make sure it's not abused and that people's rights are respected. So the Form 3 gets filled out by a different physician than the person who filled out the first form that brought someone into the hospital in the first place. And once a Form 3 is signed, a rights advisor must come and speak with the patient, explain to them that they are now on this Form 3, and they have a right to challenge it at a tribunal called the Consent and Capacity Board. So this is a specialized decision-making body that hears cases. It's kind of like a mini trial. It's a hearing that happens, and they hear evidence from the patient, usually through a lawyer that gets appointed to them, and from the physician who signed the Form 3, they hear the evidence. And this hearing is all about, does this patient actually meet the criteria that is part of this Form 3? It's on the form, and it stems from language in the Mental Health Act. Do they meet the criteria? Because it is possible that someone is unwell and they don't meet the criteria. They don't actually need to be detained as an involuntary patient at a psychiatric facility. So that's a right that comes with the Form 3 that doesn't exist under the Form 1. So as soon as that Form 3 is signed, it triggers this right to actually challenge the form at the Consent Capacity Board. In theory, that challenge can go all the way up and be appealed all the way to the Supreme Court of Canada, although that rarely happens because this form is only good for 14 days. So it's kind of moot to go through all of that process. But it is technically the right of a patient to potentially do so. So that's the Form 3 in a nutshell. It's a piece of paper that allows a physician to say that somebody needs to stay as an involuntary patient for 14 days at a psychiatric facility. So that is it for this video. I hope you learned something new, and I'll see you in the next one.